Today, we are exploring the psychedelic mysteries of the feminine. Doesn't that sound fun? Hey, it's Cheryl Sitz, and I'm back with another episode of Exploring Possibilities, broadcasting our entire library on journeyofpossibilities.com, and new episodes coming out through Apple Podcast, Google Play, and other popular podcast players, as well as youtube.com/Cheryl Sitz. We will visit with Maria Papaspyrou and Chiara Baldini in just a moment. Throughout these shows, I'm always talking about Mario Rosales' incredible technology skills, helping me launch the podcast, my website, my YouTube channel, and he can still help you with all those things. But for 5 years now, he's been working on a special project, and now he's finally ready to launch it. And I'm excited for him to tell you about it because they're absolutely beautiful. Tell us.
Well, what I have come up with, I call it Astral Fractals, and that's Astro, A-S-T-R-O, like astrology. And why is it an astral fractal? It's very simple because it uses your birth date, your birth time, and your numerology of your name. With that, I put it into this formula that I worked on for a while.
Yeah.
And it creates a fractal and it colors it and it gives you this beautiful portrait of you. And at first when I got it, it's like, what was it? What's it for? Well, if you meditate in front of it, take it to a ceremony, or if you just want to look at it like a piece of art, it's beautiful. You can look at it at my website at Astro, A-S-T-R-O, Fractals, F-R-A-C-T-A-L-S, astralfractals.com, and that'll take you directly to my website. The base package is a digital picture of it, and then I have options that go higher in price for different types of things, 8x10s, tapestries, I mean, you name it, it's whatever you want.
And they are beautiful. Astrofractals.com. Way to go, Mario. I love it.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to seeing what everybody's fractal looks like.
And you even have famous people on there. So check them out. Astrofractals.com. Inner Traditions and Bear Publishing shared a beautiful book with me. It's a compilation of essays that discuss the connection between the feminine and some ancient practices like entheogenic work with plant medicines and other ancient shamanic practices. The book resonated very deeply with me because of my own healing journey, which has involved ayahuasca, plant medicines, breath work, and more recently, dance to move energy, raise my vibration, and clear pain. Joining us from abroad to discuss this book are psychotherapist and family constellations facilitator Maria Papaspyrou and independent researcher of the evolution of ecstatic practices in the West, Chiara Baldini. Welcome, ladies.
Hello.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Yes,
Hi.
nice to meet you.
We are spanning continents to make this show happen, so thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Let's start with Chiara. We'd like to get to know you ladies better and kind of understand where you were coming from when you found the passion to go into this work deeper and spread this message in such a great way. Chiara, what did that look like for you in your life?
Well, I think my first experiences in the psychedelic world, I was in my early 20s. Now I'm 45, so it's like half of my life ago. I spent half of my life in the psychedelic world, and those early experiences were more like in underground clubs and festivals around the world. I started with the psytrance scene, and I was really fascinated by the experience itself, but also by the psychedelic culture and the people that were coming to attend these festivals, the music, the culture that I started to learn there. And so more and more gradually, I started entering into this world. And also I started my research into understanding how did we get here? Like these experiences of dancing over long periods of time, over repetitive beats and ingesting psychotropic substances, and this kind of techniques, is it something new or is it a new way of doing something old? So this was the beginning of my research that brought me on one side to continue going to festivals and learn more and more about psychedelic culture in the contemporary level, but also it brought me into studying at first in a random way, like book after book, like following an invisible thread, studying how in the Western culture, we developed this cult of ecstasy, what I called ecstatic cult. So cult is a strong word. I realize it's more like ecstatic practices. So how did we engage into techniques of reaching an altered state of consciousness in the West. So you see, my journey was personal and at the same time was a researcher's journey.
Yes.
So this is how I developed this willingness to follow this thread. And then I started attending the first conferences, and I started noticing the lack of women on the side of the speakers. And so that was actually the very beginning of the seed of this book. When I went to my first conference, it was in Basel in 2007. And I realized that the women were maybe 2 or 3 in the whole conference speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And I started feeling this need inside, like I need to do something about it. Either I start to speak, or also I start to help other women to be more visible and their voices to be heard.
Fabulous and much needed. I'm so excited to hear about that. And thank you for heeding the call yourself personally to step forward. And Maria, how you met Chiara at some point along the way. How did this become a passion for you?
So I'll follow Chiara's lead and thread here for how the journey started. So my 2 threads were an interest in psychedelic culture and an interest in altered and expanded states of consciousness. And that was alongside my training as a psychotherapist. And the 2 somehow formed parallel lines for a very, very long time. And starting to write and starting to speak on matters that bring the 2 together was a way to really integrate, if you like, the 2 very important areas of input in my life. Psychedelic culture and thinking and practices with psychotherapeutic practices. And I think they're a very powerful combination. They're a very, very potent mix. And along the way, the thing that kept emerging was that the necessary step in the personal journey was to heal the feminine lines that trail behind me, and to heal through that my relationship with the feminine on a personal level. The immediate feminine of my family, the women in my family, and by extension the feminine energies within myself. So along that way, me and Chiara met. We met in a conference in London, and the meeting really sparked that creative work between us, which was around the feminine and around altered states. And as Chiara said, what was very clear was that in all the conferences, but also in all the literature, the space was dominated by high-profile men who have done incredible work and have offered a lot to the psychedelic community. But the feminine voice and the feminine way of looking at things, the feminine perspective and feminine matters that exist in the psychedelic community were really absent. And we were saying that the inequalities that we see in the world outside are part of a counterculture that we both respect and love dearly. And yet it seems to retain the power structures of the world outside. So it was a call to women. It was also a call to men. For us, this is a call to the wider psychedelic community. It's not a gendered call. And the feminine we really want to call and bring forward is an element of all of us. It's an aspect of men and women. So on a personal level, editing the book was part of the integration journey, moving forward and peeling through layers of, what it is to connect with the feminine essence and what it is to be a woman today in today's world.
Beautifully said. And I loved your chapter, by the way.
Thank you very much.
So we're talking a lot about the feminine, and this is probably not a short answer, or it could be, but I loved the way it is laid out throughout the book, the ways that the feminine express through these ceremonies. the work itself that arises within us is very feminine by nature. Would one of you like to, or both of you, like to weigh in on how you feel the feminine, why you call them femtheogens? I loved that term. And where you feel the feminine is best expressed and summarized through this work.
Chiara, shall I start with this?
Yes.
Yeah. So the term femtheogens is about avoiding long sentences and bringing a word that can concisely be used throughout the chapter. And it refers to the feminine energy and the entheogenic energy. So the entheogens are another word for psychedelic. Psychedelic means, well, people say it means mind manifesting. It doesn't. The etymology means psyche manifesting. It's a very different thing. But entheogens refer to the spiritual capacity that opens up with psychedelic use, the spiritual dimension of the psychedelic experience. The qualities and the openings that psychedelic experiences support and facilitate have a very strong resonance with the qualities of the feminine archetype, and they really bring to the foreground of the psychedelic experience wisdom, knowledge, attitudes, qualities, ways of being that in today's culture and society have been neglected, and they have been delegated to our collective shadow. They haven't been acknowledged, they haven't been supported. So altered states of consciousness have this incredible potential of bringing to the surface these long forgotten ways of being that are stored deeply within us, but our current social, political, cultural paradigms don't really allow us to experience and express. So they bring up our awareness of interconnectedness. You know, one of the cornerstones of feminine consciousness is being aware of our interconnectedness and our oneness. They bring out the creative fertility that exists within our souls and our psyches, which is a feminine aspect, but it's also a big aspect of all the states of consciousness and how they operate. And they bring us to a place where they allow us to find a rightful place within the wider whole, within the world we live in. What ordinary consciousness tends to do is it can distort our place within the world. You know, it can make us feel isolated and separate and disconnected. What these experiences and the feminine have the potential to do is restore our sense of connection to ourselves and to others. And I think that's the most important medicine that can flow out of the feminine and out of altered states of consciousness.
Yes, and to the world that we're living in and to our planet. I think it gives us that interconnected piece back also.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautifully put. Chiara, would you like to add to that?
Well, Maria is really good to speak about these topics because actually, her chapter is the first one and really gives shape to the rest of the book in a certain sense. It's a really good opening. And what can I say more to that? It's through the different essays, we see how this concept of what is the feminine principle takes different shapes and forms. And actually, this was our intention, to present many different perspectives to this, and even to present perspectives that contradict one another, to also present the work in a feminine way, in a new post-patriarchal way that is about not showing one way. There's not one answer to a question. There's many answers, there's many perspectives, and there's many ways. And so I just wanted to add this point of also the method that we use to choose the essays had this perspective of allowing different answers to the same question: what is the feminine and what is its connection to altered state of consciousness?
Yes, it does that so well. And, you know, someone told me early in my education journey that wisdom is about being able to hold contradicting points of view simultaneously. And the book really reminded me of that because I found myself agreeing with each essay, even though they didn't necessarily agree with each other. They all express different facets of the greater truth that we experience through this journey. And for me, it's been deeply healing, and I have experienced different methodologies that are described in the book and done deeply feminine sexual healing work along the last decade. And so seeing the different things that came up and how it helps us access our ancestors and how it helps us access that greater archetypal feminine that we're working with. And I believe the plants to be feminine in vibration because they tend to almost activate and awaken that within us just innately. Very interesting. Would you like to add anything to that?
Chiara has explored the links between ceremony and the feminine in ancient times and in our sort of historical lineage, if you like. And she edited the chapter that really explored the role of women in ceremonial practices in the past. So I'd like to probe her on that.
Yeah, I mean, in my chapter, the main topic is the role of women in the cult of Dionysus. And the cult of Dionysus is one of the main cults in Southern Western culture, Southern European culture, that involved the technique of altered state of consciousness and that involved lots of people over many centuries. So it's like a main thread to research to understand how we used these techniques and then what were the roles of the different genders using these techniques. And it came out that women had a prominent role and were probably also the ones practicing an archaic version of the cult. And then it was interesting to research how more contemporary scholars interpreted the original sources that were stating the importance of women in administering the cult, in being, again, sorry, I use this word cult. I hope that the listeners understand I'm referring to practices in a spiritual/religious space. So we're not talking about sects or anything like this. We're talking about ancient practices. It was interesting to see how contemporary scholars were still deep into the patriarchal phase in the 40s and 50s and 60s. They were looking at these old ancient practices and the role of women, trying to give this excuse that, the women need some kind of hysterical release. So they go and dance a lot, or they take certain barks and roots and seeds that lead them in an altered state to then just release their frustration for being disconnected from each other and generally repressed by patriarchal culture. But actually in my essay, I wanted to bring out the fact that this was a very ancient lineage that goes way back into the Neolithic and Paleolithic times, where there was this main goddess figure and representing Mother Nature, and how women were the priestesses administering these rituals in honor of the reconnection to nature, of the seeing what is humans' role within the cycles of nature, and also to honor the fact that through the dying and resurrecting plants and human sexual energy within it, how life continued to manifest on Earth. So I tried to point to this very ancient lineage, and not just to say that in Greek times, women would go on mountains and celebrate Dionysian rituals because they were repressed by patriarchy. It was also because of that, but not only.
Well, and also it's great how it's referenced through the book that women have kind of, those pictures have disappeared where the women were leading the ceremonies. What we continue to see is men leading ceremonies, male shaman, and that wasn't the case. There were many women throughout history, powerful female shaman, as are now. We've worked with them in South America, and it's been amazing experience to have that strong feminine energy not only coming through from the plants and from Pachamama herself through the plants, but through the leadership of the ceremonies. It's a completely different experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Max Dashu's essay, especially, she really gives this overview over all the different kinds of shamanic cultures all over the world, and in very ancient times, in different times, but generally ancient times and everywhere, how women had a prominent role, and how much they were respected, actually, because of that tendency to be the ones being able to lead that kind of ceremony.
Yes. Well, and I don't want men to feel left out here. So I think this would be a great time to interject, because we do have some male listeners, and the feminine exists in all of us. So how can men and women both benefit from engaging and working with this feminine energy again in a predominantly patriarchal society?
Maria, I think I leave that to you.
So again, back a little bit back to what I said in terms of what was happening for me. I think it's really important that we do our work with our personal feminine, in the feminine in our lives, as well as the masculine. I think it's just as important. But in terms of our psyches, in terms of our internal world, I come from informed in terms of my ideas from Jungian analytical psychology. And in the Jungian world, we all have any kind of archetype is a collective psychic entity, and it belongs to us collectively. So whether we're men or women, we have the masculine and the feminine archetype within us. And we have to work in order to bring them to a state of balance. We have to bring them to a place where they can inform each other, collaborate and support us and resource us from that place in how we live our lives and how we encounter the world. If one is distorted and out of shape, or if one is constantly dominating and predominating, then this will express itself in how we experience our place in the world and how we live our lives. So it's important in a work for all of us. So whether we're men or women, we have to grapple with these energies and find a way that we relate to them in a way that can support us in everyday life. In a world that is predominantly supporting sort of what you would call masculine ways of being, the logic and the mind, and would suppress forces like creativity and intuitive, spontaneous ways of being, then we really have to work a little bit harder to retrieve these aspects of being. We have to remember them really into consciousness, so that we can use whatever force and charge they can offer us for our lives.
Yes, and I feel like these ceremonies not only do that, help all of us remember what that feminine feels like experientially, but also they can reveal for us where, because we talk about this masculine culture that we're living in now, but even the masculine has become distorted in ways. So it's kind of like it brings forward the healthiest version of both as something that we can ceremonially experience. And then the real work is bringing that experience forward into daily life, right?
Yes. And, thank you for making that point, because I think I sort of got lost in what you actually asked. So we all support this system today, men and women, and we all have to really grapple with what is our place in terms of the general status quo and how we support it and how we attack nature and the feminine. And the biggest obstacle that has happened for men in terms of these patriarchal masculine structures is that it has really made it very difficult for them to connect with their feelings, and it has made it unacceptable to be open to and receptive to feelings. And we see men today making a real effort to find paths that will allow them that sort of resource, if you like. The biggest cause of death for young men in the UK today is suicide. It's an absolute cause and effect of a culture that doesn't allow men to express and discuss their emotions, that to have feelings is to be weak. So there's very, very tragic consequences for men as well as women out of these patriarchal structures and out of the suppression of the feminine and feminine ways of being and living.
Absolutely. Chiara, did you want to add to that?
Well, maybe I can add the perspective that more and more I am reflecting on when we see the masculine and the feminine on a spectrum. So to add to this, that we tend to look at it as a binary, but actually is a spectrum from masculine to feminine. But then again, the masculine and the feminine also are on their own spectrum between light and shadow, also as Maria says in her essay.
Mm-hmm.
And so to see all these spectrums not as bidimensional, but as three-dimensional with so many intersections, and to see beyond the duality of masculine and feminine and in this bidimensional way, but to see it as a three-dimensional construct, in also using this way of looking at reality from a psychedelic perspective. And so this is what I've been reflecting more recently to also, because, you know, we were talking about women, you said, what about men? And then I was thinking, what about all those others that don't identify as women and men?
Yes.
So we are entering into this new cultural phase where we start to look at reality in this more complex, intersectional way that allows for the transcending linear and binary way to look at reality. So I'm very excited if the book can also contribute to that.
Yes.
Because in some essays, again, we are talking about feminine energies, and is it really ayahuasca a feminine entity? Is it just a way that we have to look at it as Westerners because we needed to have some kind of grandma that takes care of us again? And do the indigenous people look at it like that? And so to start asking more and more questions. What about men? What about the ones that don't even identify as men and women? What about the shadow of the feminine? What about the light of the masculine? So this is all the questions that I hope the book will bring into the readers.
And it's such a perfect
awareness.
Way to look at it too, because, you know, in ceremony, everything that we play with mentally and in language through these conversations becomes imagery, and it's multicolored, multidimensional, just to kind of show us that's what we're really dealing with here. There's not a duality of masculine, feminine, light and shadow. We have, like you say, all of this language, but reality is much more complex and multidimensional than that. And I think that's the gift of these experiential ceremonies, is they expand everything out of the this or that type questioning that we play with in life to something much greater, for us to really kind of come to accept all the contradictions as part of the whole. And
also I want to add something, because you are always referring to ceremonies, but also in the book we talk about trance dance sessions, for example, holotropic breathwork sessions, or even giving birth as a psychedelic experience. So these are all doors to access those realms, and ceremonies is a main door for many people. But then there is also all these other doors available. So if someone doesn't really resonate with the possibility to experience a ceremony, there is many other doors that one can use to enter these realms.
Absolutely. And thank you for that, because I was including all of those in the way that I work with it, because I do all of it. To me, ceremony is when I enter an altered space for healing and expansion and awareness. And it can be through all of those ways. So thank you for illuminating that. And I love how the book goes essay from essay through all the different ways that we can access altered reality for greater awareness and understanding. I'd like for you to speak a little bit about the disintegration, reintegration that happens through all of these different pathways and how that helps us in living a more conscious life.
Maria, want to talk about integration?
Yeah. Or the disintegration.
Exactly.
Well, it starts with disintegration. So psychedelic experiences have this rhythm, if you like. They will take our sense of self apart, and then they will put it back together. But hopefully, they will put it back together in a way that has a little bit more complexity than the sense of self we had before. The deintegration, I would call it, rather than disintegration. It's a sort of psychological evolutionary journey. It helps us. It helps us reform in a way that takes us a little bit further on our journey towards a fuller sense of self. But of course, that is not what happens within a journey. The journey will initiate some of that. The work we're going to do after an experience in altered states is what will really support this reintegration phase to become a solid part of who we are. Because unless we integrate insights or openings, they can, after a while, very easily, as you probably understand, they can just sink back into the unconscious, and it can be like it never happened. So while altered states of consciousness really work on that rhythm, they take us from order into chaos, which is the deintegration stage, back into an order of greater complexity than before. We need to support this process, but the development of the self, the wider self, that's the self with a capital S, rather than the self with a lower s, which would be the egoic self. So the development of the wider self really rests on that movement, on that rhythm of being taken apart, being put back together. It's like a series of deaths and rebirths. We have the question of the ego here, where the psychedelic community sometimes seems really keen to slay and get rid of. In order for us to really make use of these states, we really need the ego, because the ego is what will have the capacity to do the integration work. But for brief and yet very valuable and precious moments, that ego can cease to exist in the way we understand it in ordinary consciousness. And as long as the ego can come back into functioning and can do the assimilating for us, this is a very valuable opportunity into becoming a lot more than what everyday ordinary consciousness allows us to.
That's such a beautiful portrait of how we can use it in life. I mean, that's really what I find myself doing in my daily life, at the point that I can surrender, let go, let it fall apart and come back together on small scales and big scales. That is how we work through life's trials.
Yes, ideally, Cheryl. That is how we. But we're human, and I think we will all catch ourselves trying to hold on to.
Yes.
And resist change and grief. But as long as we have a framework, and again, psychedelic experiences can really hone that framework and allow us to access it a little bit sooner than we would have otherwise. And it's the same with psychedelic experiences. The whole message is surrender. And I think that's what they teach on a very deep level, how to surrender and how to peel through the layers of fear and resistance that are installed in us throughout childhood and later life and all our life experiences.
And the beauty that waits on the other side of what we think we're so desperate to hold on to. And then when we finally let go, it's like, oh, wow, I had no idea I was holding on to that when I could have had this. But it's getting through that fear, isn't it? Chiara, would you like to add?
I really like a quote from the essay of Nadia Erlam when she talks about neuroqueer in drug policy. She says that patriarchy is a neurotic state of mind, a paranoid state of mind that refuses anything that can trigger change. And so we see that at the collective level, how we are in that point now, that there's so much resistance towards a new way of being, a new cultural paradigm. And, so in one way we are pushing towards that change, but also we can have some kind of compassion towards our collective inability to go through that change.
Yes.
When we see this happening also in our personal lives. And so then from the small, we go to the big, and we see how all of these big structures are resisting what's coming next. And at the same time, holding, as you said, Cheryl, the possibility, the faith that what is to come next is much better than what we have been used to until now. So that's my wish.
Absolutely. Yeah. And from everything that I'm seeing, 2020 and these next few years are going to be all about becoming comfortable with the unknown and really allowing bigger change to unfold for the shift to move forward. And that's got a lot of us edgy, even those of us that have been in ceremony experiencing change after change after change and surrender and letting go. It's like, whoo, this is a lot. And we're all reaching for that solid ground that we can relax on and go, we made it. And I don't think it's coming right now. I think we're just at the beginning of this being the new norm, becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable and embracing change. And I do believe all the things that this book talks about can help us do that and find joy and happiness in the unknown and in what has been uncomfortable for this conditioning.
So there is this essay in the book by Anna Luke that is called Towards Radical Uncertainty that speaks exactly to that, to this need to let go and to be comfortable in not knowing, and to actually find a resource into that space of not knowing by just letting go, to the need of knowing all the time what's going on and what's next. So it is actually, she also points out how this is a quality of the feminine that we are rediscovering.
Yes.
This being comfortable in the not knowing, in the uncertainty, and accepting reality in this point of not knowing. And she talks about her personal journey in learning about being comfortable with that. And she goes through how uncomfortable it was to sit before a ceremony and not knowing what was going to happen next, and all the discomfort that was coming from that, and how she progressively learned to see it as a source of to see it as a resource, the possibility of not knowing rather than a limitation. Yes. So I invite everyone to read that essay, because I think also the way that she writes is so beautiful. She's a writer she's a professional writer. So it's really an incredible essay, Towards Radical Uncertainty.
It sure is. And, the funny thing about that is we have experienced the feminine as kind of, in this culture, it has been, if I'm being feminine, I'm being soft and quiet and malleable and dainty. And it's almost been seen as a weakness. And what you describe as, and thank you for bringing out that essay. It is fabulous. That place of being in the unknown, that is pure power of the feminine. That is standing at the point of all possibility and allowing whatever is for the highest good to happen and getting out of the way. And that is a very brave act. It is not a weak act. The feminine is not weak. It is incredibly strong.
Otherwise, it wouldn't have been suppressed, probably.
Exactly. Oh, I'm so glad you said that. That was perfectly timed.
But and to remember, we're not talking about men and women. We're talking about a feminine principle, so that men can also identify in this new phase where they can access that power that has been repressed. Absolutely. So it's not about the women rising on top of men. God, nobody wants that.
Perfect.
But it's really rediscovering the power of those principles and characteristics of our psyche that we had to repress for this phase of history, and we hope that we can reconnect with that in the next.
Yes, it's about balancing those two forces of energy within ourselves so that we can come to a place of compassionate power within ourselves and share from that place with one another, rather than this feeling incomplete and whole in these places and reaching out to complete that outside of ourselves. It's really about that balancing within.
Maria, do you want to say something? Because otherwise I would actually like to read. There is exactly about this point. In our conclusion, Weaving Our Way Back Home, these essays consistently call for the legitimization of a new cultural paradigm in which uncertainty, paradox, non-duality, divine intervention, and embodied intuition are embraced. Here, they enjoy their rightful place next to the need to measure, control, compute, and institutionalize. This is a new cultural paradigm whereby a balance is re-established between the mind, the heart, and the body, between the tangible and the ineffable. So I wanted to read this point because also it's not about shifting too much to the other side, but as you said, it's about holding the balance. And so it's not that we are advocating towards let's not anymore measure, control, compute, and institutionalize. Let's keep on doing that in a more balanced way with its own opposites.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Well, ladies, I love this visit. I could talk with you all day long. I understand why you're at conferences and sharing this message in books and being so public with it, because you both do a great job of bringing together people with important messages and spreading those. So thank you both for being here. I'd like to wrap up by asking each of you in turn if you have a parting thought you'd like to leave us with today. Maria?
Well, firstly, thank you. Thank you. It's been really lovely to finally meet you and to have this discussion with you. I think we need to be opening up spaces where men and women meet and speak authentically about their experiences in today's world and their experiences with each other. And I think we have to be very careful with out of defensiveness perpetuating a shaming culture, either a shaming culture towards women or a shaming culture towards men. I don't think it will get us where we need to be getting. As soon as shaming happens, something contracts and there's no possibility or space for real dialogue to emerge. And we need spaces where men and women come together and difficult dialogues can take place, so we find a way of harmonizing how we experience the world today between us. So I guess that's my parting thought, how to bring the masculine and the feminine on an archetypal level back into harmony, but how to do that on a personal level in our everyday lives, how much we need spaces for men and women together to come together and really meet.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's so true. And for all the work that you're doing. Chiara, would you like to share a parting thought with us?
I would like to share a parting wish, because Christmas is coming and we know how much we are going to look into the possibility of getting presents for our friends and family. And I want to invite the women to give this book as a present to men. Because I've seen a lot of women come into the book launches that I've been attending until now. And every time I'm like, yeah, but this information is really important also for men to read. So my parting wish is maybe the people that are listening will find this, I would like to seduce them into the possibility of buying this book for a man.
That's a wonderful vision. I like it. Mario's over here with his thumb up, and I know he's getting this copy now so that he can enjoy it. Ladies, you're doing amazing work in raising awareness, and thank you both so much for taking the time to be with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Sherry.
Thank you.
And thank
everyone that was listening until now. I hope this was useful, and I really hope it will make them curious to see what this book is about.
I hope so too. That is the whole intention. And thank you, listener, for joining us. Check out the book. Let us know what you thought of this interview, and you can give us your feedback and your support at journeyofpossibilities.com. And make sure to like us on your favorite podcast platform so others can find the show. We will see you next time on Exploring Possibilities.